Imagine waking up one morning and realizing your mind isn't slipping away because of age. It's being stolen by someone you trusted the most.
It's so good to
That's
see
exactly
you.
what happened to Margaret Collins, a 63-year-old widow
You
who
too,
thought her
my
new
dear.
daughter-in-law was caring for her. In
I'm so
reality,
glad we could finally
every
have this dinner
smile,
together,
every
dear.
meal,
Me
every
too, it's been
pill
too
was
long.
part of a deadly plan to erase her piece by piece. This is not just a story about betrayal. It's about survival, courage, and the strength to fight back when danger lives inside your own home. If stories like this grip you as much as they did me, make sure to subscribe to my channel so you won't miss the next life story that could change the way you look at trust and family forever, says. The late summer sun cast a golden haze over the sleepy town of Willow Creek, where houses sat neatly along tree-lined streets, and the air smelled faintly of honeysuckle. From the porch of her modest two-story home, Margaret Collins often watched the days drift by like clouds across the pale blue sky. At 63, she carried the weight of both grief and resilience. A widow for nearly a decade, she had built a rhythm of life that was calm, predictable, and filled with small rituals: her morning tea, tending to her rose bushes, and reading by the living room window until dusk painted the sky. Margaret was tall for her age, with soft gray hair she wore in a neat bun, and warm brown eyes that often betrayed her tendency to overthink. Life had taught her to be cautious but not bitter. Her late husband, Thomas, had been the love of her life, and though his sudden heart attack had shaken her world, she had adapted, carving a new existence with quiet strength. Her only son, Daniel Collins, was her pride, though he was also her deepest source of worry. Daniel was 35, broad-shouldered, with dark brown hair that he kept slightly tousled as if he never had time for grooming. He had his father's sharp jawline but softer, more uncertain eyes that flickered between confidence and hesitation. Daniel worked as a financial consultant, a career that demanded long hours and endless patience with demanding clients. He had inherited his father's work ethic but lacked his emotional steadiness, often crumbling under pressure. Margaret knew that his childhood had left him marked by both love and loss. Thomas's early death forced Daniel to become the man of the house far sooner than he should have, and though he never said it out loud, Margaret felt he carried guilt for not protecting her better. For years, it had been just the two of them. Their bond was strong, though sometimes strained by Margaret's subtle protectiveness and Daniel's desire for independence. But all that changed the day Vanessa Miller entered their lives. Vanessa was 29, a woman who seemed to step out of a glossy magazine with her polished elegance. She was tall, with long legs that carried her confidently into every room, her skin a flawless olive tone that spoke of Mediterranean ancestry. Her dark hair, always perfectly styled into waves, framed a symmetrical face with piercing green eyes that rarely missed anything. Vanessa had a smile that could disarm strangers, a laugh that made people lean closer, and a mind sharp enough to hold her own in any conversation. But beneath the charm, Margaret sometimes sensed a harder edge, as if every gesture Vanessa made was calculated, rehearsed. Daniel had met Vanessa at a networking event in the city. She had been working as a public relations manager for a mid-sized firm, handling clients with grace and persuasion. According to him, she had captivated the entire room, but it was her attention to him, a man who often felt overlooked, that had sealed his admiration. Within months, Daniel had fallen deeply in love, and Margaret, though cautious, welcomed Vanessa with the optimism of a mother eager to see her son happy again. The wedding was small but elegant, held in the backyard of Vanessa's aunt's estate. Margaret remembered the way Vanessa had glided across the grass in her fitted ivory gown, commanding attention with every step. She looked like a queen stepping into her kingdom, and Daniel followed her with the look of a man who believed his life had just been transformed. Margaret, standing near the roses she herself had helped arrange, felt a strange pang of unease she couldn't explain. It wasn't jealousy. She had long accepted that her son needed to build a life of his own. It was something more instinctive, a whisper of warning she quickly silenced. At first, Margaret convinced herself that Vanessa's presence was a blessing. Vanessa visited often, bringing expensive wine, suggesting new restaurants, and urging Daniel and Margaret to take family trips together. She spoke with confidence, her words flowing like silk, and Margaret was grateful to see her son so animated, laughing more than he had in years. But soon, small details began to trouble her. Vanessa often made casual comments about Margaret's house, how old the kitchen was, how unsafe the stairs looked, how perhaps it was time for something more modern. She offered to reorganize Margaret's pantry, insisting she was just helping, yet somehow Margaret could never find her tea tins afterward. When bills arrived, Vanessa would intercept them with a smile, saying, "Oh, let me help you sort these, Margaret. You shouldn't stress about little things." Her tone was sweet, but the implication that Margaret was too fragile, too incapable gnawed at her pride. Margaret tried to brush it off. Perhaps Vanessa was simply trying to be helpful. Perhaps she was projecting her own need for control, something many young women carried when they wanted to prove themselves. But the more Vanessa inserted herself into the rhythm of Margaret's life, the more Margaret felt her home was no longer hers. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table, Vanessa placed her manicured hand on Daniel's arm and said, "You know, Dan, your mom shouldn't be worrying about managing money at her age. These things can be complicated. Maybe I could help organize a budget for her." Margaret felt her stomach tighten. She forced a smile and replied, "I've been balancing my accounts for 40 years, Vanessa. I think I can still handle it." Vanessa laughed lightly, as if Margaret's protest were amusing rather than valid. "Of course, Margaret, I didn't mean any offense. I just think we should all look out for each other," Daniel, caught between the two women, shifted uncomfortably. "She's just trying to help, Mom," he said gently. Margaret nodded, but inside her thoughts churned. Help or control? Was she being paranoid, or was Vanessa slowly painting her as incapable? That night, as she lay in bed, Margaret stared at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the ceiling fan. She wanted to trust Vanessa, to embrace this new family dynamic, but a seed of unease had been planted, and she could feel it rooting deeper every day. For the first time in years, Margaret wondered if her quiet life in Willow Creek was no longer hers to shape. Margaret Collins woke to a haze of dull gray light filtering through her bedroom curtains, a light that made the morning feel colder than it truly was. At 63, she had always prided herself on rising early, her mind sharp and her routine steady. But lately, mornings had become difficult. Her body felt weighted, her head foggy, as though she had been drinking though she never touched alcohol. She sat up slowly, pressing a hand against her temple, trying to remember whether she had turned off the kitchen light before bed. The memory was missing, like a page torn from a book. In the kitchen, Vanessa Miller was already bustling about. Vanessa, in her early 30s, stood tall and graceful, her long auburn hair tied back neatly, and her blue silk blouse tucked into slim black pants that seemed out of place for an ordinary weekday breakfast. She moved with polished efficiency, her manicured hands arranging fruit slices on a plate. Her voice was gentle, melodic, always wrapped in kindness, though beneath the sweetness there was a firmness, a tone that commanded obedience. "Good morning, Margaret," she said warmly, setting down a steaming cup of herbal tea. "I've made your tea just the way you like it. Sit. Rest." Margaret offered a faint smile, but inside unease gnawed at her. She had never liked being told to rest. It made her feel frail, unnecessary. Yet her limbs trembled as she lowered herself into the chair, surprised at her own weakness. Daniel entered moments later, his presence filling the kitchen with warmth. At 35, Daniel was tall and broad-shouldered, with short chestnut hair and a trim beard that gave him a rugged, approachable look. He worked as a high school history teacher, and his voice carried the calm authority of a man used to commanding a classroom. His eyes, soft hazel, always carried traces of his late father, and it comforted Margaret, though today she saw worry etched in them. "Mom, you don't look well," Daniel said, sliding into the chair beside her. "Vanessa's been telling me you've been tired a lot lately. Forgetting things, too. I think we should schedule an appointment with Dr. Sanders." His tone was gentle, but there was no room for argument. Dr. William Sanders had been Margaret's physician for nearly 2 decades. In his early 50s, with streaks of gray threading through his dark hair and a kindly, weathered face, he was known for his patience and thoroughness. Margaret had always trusted him, though the suggestion that she might need to see him for memory lapses stung deeply. Her mind had always been her pride. She was the one neighbors came to when they needed a recipe recalled, a date remembered, or the right words to finish a crossword puzzle. To think that her mind might be betraying her was unbearable. "I don't need a doctor," Margaret muttered, forcing a smile. "I'm just tired, that's all. Maybe I didn't sleep well." Vanessa leaned closer, her perfume faintly floral, but sharp at the edges. "Margaret, it's nothing to be ashamed of. Aging can be difficult. Let us take care of you. I've already prepared your vitamins and supplements. You just need to focus on resting." She placed a small dish of pills beside the teacup, her expression sympathetic yet insistent. Margaret glanced at the pills. The colors and shapes looked familiar, yet she could not remember ever taking so many before. Her throat tightened as she hesitated. Daniel placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Mom, Vanessa's right. Please, just let us help you." His trust in his wife was absolute, and Margaret could not bring herself to protest. Slowly, she picked up the pills, swallowing them with a sip of tea. The day unfolded with an unusual haze. Margaret tried to read in her favorite armchair by the window, but the words blurred. At one point, she realized she had read the same sentence 5 times without understanding it. Later, she tried to water her potted geraniums, only to discover she had already watered them that morning. The soil was drenched. Confusion pressed down on her chest, leaving her short of breath. She sat back down, clutching the armrest, her heart thudding. That evening, Daniel returned home with a determined look. "Mom," he said, "I called Dr. Sanders." "He can see you tomorrow morning," Margaret wanted to protest again, but her voice faltered. The truth was undeniable. Something was wrong. Yet deep inside, a whisper of doubt nagged at her. Was this truly her body betraying her, or was something else happening? She glanced at Vanessa, who stood behind Daniel, smiling reassuringly, her arms folded lightly across her chest. There was something in her eyes, calm, confident, almost too calm. Margaret shivered without knowing why. As the night wore on, she lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling. She tried to recall her grocery list from yesterday, a simple exercise she often did before sleeping. But the list vanished into a blank fog. The harder she tried, the more her head throbbed. She felt as though her mind was slowly slipping through her fingers, one memory at a time. Tears stung her eyes, not from pain, but from the terror of losing herself. She whispered softly into the darkness, "This isn't me." Something's not right, but no one was there to hear. The morning sun streamed faintly through the gauzy curtains of Margaret Collins's room, the warmth failing to comfort her restless heart. She had been awake since dawn, mind buzzing with unease. The fog that had gripped her thoughts for days seemed lighter today, as though the mist had thinned just enough to let her see shapes moving beneath the surface. She rose slowly, every movement deliberate, afraid of dizziness, and made her way down the hall toward the guest room Vanessa had claimed as her home office. The door was slightly ajar, unusual for Vanessa, who guarded her space with quiet vigilance. Margaret hesitated, then gently pushed the door open. The room smelled faintly of lavender, mixed with something metallic, perhaps the faint tang of electronics. On the desk, sat Vanessa's sleek silver laptop, the screen still glowing, its dark background alive with open documents. Margaret's heart pounded. She told herself to walk away, to respect boundaries, but curiosity pricked like needles against her skin. She stepped closer, her wrinkled hands trembling as she leaned over the glowing screen. The files were titled plainly, yet ominously, sedative dosage comparisons, common household poisons and effects, insurance claim procedures. Her chest tightened as her eyes skimmed the contents. Paragraphs described the effects of small doses of sedatives over time, how memory could blur, balance could falter, and confusion could set in. Another document listed life insurance policies, neatly tabulated with beneficiaries and payout amounts. Margaret's name appeared at the top of one file. Her knees nearly gave out beneath her, and she gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself. She snapped her head toward the door at the faint sound of footsteps. The hallway was empty, but fear surged hot through her veins. Closing the laptop with careful slowness, she returned the chair exactly as it had been, every gesture deliberate, almost ceremonial. She slipped out of the room, her pulse still hammering in her ears. The rest of the morning she wandered the house, thoughts circling like hawks. Was she imagining things? Could Vanessa's research be innocent? Perhaps related to her job? Vanessa had worked as a part-time caregiver before marrying Daniel, yet the documents were too specific, too cold. Margaret tried to swallow the lump of dread in her throat, but the bitterness lingered. By afternoon, a knock at the front door startled her. Daniel was at work, Vanessa out shopping. Margaret shuffled to the door and opened it to find a young woman standing nervously on the porch. She couldn't have been more than 25. With olive skin, dark brown hair tied into a simple ponytail, and wary eyes the color of burnt amber. She wore jeans and a faded jacket, her fingers twisting the strap of a canvas bag slung over her shoulder. "Mrs. Collins?" the young woman asked softly, her voice tinged with both caution and urgency. "Yes," Margaret replied, cautious but polite. "My name is Chloe Ramirez. I need to talk to you. It's about Vanessa." The mention of her daughter-in-law's name sent a chill through Margaret. She opened the door wider, motioning the young woman inside. They sat at the dining table, Chloe fidgeting, her gaze flicking to the window as though afraid of being seen. "My grandmother, Elena," Chloe began, voice quivering, "died last year. She was 76, strong for her age. She only needed a little help around the house." Vanessa was hired as her caregiver. Chloe's throat tightened, and she clasped her hands to steady herself. At first, everything seemed fine. Vanessa was charming, attentive, but within months, my grandmother became weak, confused, forgetful. The doctor said it might be dementia, but it all happened so fast. Then one night, she didn't wake up. Chloe's eyes glistened with restrained tears. Her death was ruled natural causes, but something never felt right. Then I found your address linked to Vanessa. I had to come. Margaret's breath caught. Her heart told her Chloe's story was not coincidence. She thought of the laptop files, the pills Vanessa prepared each morning, the fog that crept into her mind. Her hands trembled as she folded them tightly in her lap. "Did you tell the police?" Margaret asked. Chloe shook her head, her expression bitter. There was nothing to prove. No one suspected foul play. Vanessa moved on, and I couldn't convince anyone otherwise. But when I heard she married into a new family, your family, I knew I had to warn you. Please, Mrs. Collins, you have to be careful. Margaret studied Chloe carefully. There was no deceit in her eyes, only pain and determination. Her voice cracked with sincerity, and Margaret felt a surge of protectiveness toward the girl, as though she were her own granddaughter. Still, the danger of believing too quickly gnawed at her. She reached across the table, laying her hand gently over Chloe's. Thank you for coming. You were brave to tell me this, but you must be careful too. If Vanessa has done what we both suspect, confronting her without proof could be dangerous. Chloe nodded, wiping her eyes. I don't want anyone else to get hurt. If you need me, if you find something, I'll help you. I work at the library downtown. I'm usually there in the afternoons. Please don't face her alone. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway jolted them both. Margaret's stomach twisted. Vanessa's laugh floated through the open window as she stepped from her car, cheerful and melodic. Margaret hurried Chloe toward the back door, whispering urgently, "Go, quickly." Chloe slipped out silently, vanishing around the corner just as the front door opened. "Margaret!" Vanessa called brightly, carrying shopping bags into the kitchen. Her auburn hair gleamed in the light, her smile flawless, her demeanor radiant as always. But now, behind the mask, Margaret saw shadows curling, dark and hungry. She forced a smile, her lips trembling as she replied, "Yes, dear." I was just tidying up inside, her mind screamed. She had confirmation now, clues of poison, the whispers of another victim, and a young stranger's warning. The shadows were no longer creeping, they were here, lurking inside her own home. The air in the Collins household had shifted. Where once laughter and warmth had flowed freely, now silence crept between the walls, pressing heavy against Margaret's chest. Every clink of glass, every rustle of paper, every glance across the dinner table seemed loaded with meaning. Vanessa's smile, wide and dazzling, had become a mask Margaret could no longer unsee. She had heard Chloe's warning, and she had glimpsed the damning files on the laptop. But suspicion was not enough. Proof, tangible, undeniable proof, was what she needed. That opportunity came one gray Thursday morning. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled like a restless spirit. Margaret sat in the kitchen as Vanessa approached with her usual grace. Vanessa's tall, slender frame moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being watched. Her auburn hair shone despite the gloomy weather, her lips painted in a deep rose shade that clashed against the storm outside. She carried a small glass of water in one hand and 2 white pills in the other. "Here, Margaret," Vanessa said sweetly, setting the items down in front of her mother-in-law. "These will help with the headaches. I don't want you to suffer." Margaret forced her lips into a faint smile. "Thank you, dear." She picked up the pills, holding them carefully between her fingers. The trust in her voice was rehearsed, a brittle echo of the days when she had believed Vanessa's kindness to be genuine. She lifted the glass, tilted it toward her lips, and let the pills slide against her tongue. She made a show of swallowing, sipping water slowly before setting the glass down. Vanessa's sharp eyes flickered with satisfaction. What Vanessa didn't see was the tiny sleight of hand Margaret had performed. The pills were pressed discreetly into her napkin, folded neatly, and slipped into the pocket of her cardigan. Margaret's heart pounded as though it might betray her secret, but she forced her expression into one of docile compliance. That afternoon, she slipped quietly out of the house while Vanessa busied herself with errands. Margaret's destination was the clinic of Dr. Evelyn Turner, a physician she had known for over a decade. Dr. Turner was in her mid-50s, with silver streaks running through her chestnut hair, a warm but no-nonsense demeanor, and clear hazel eyes that always seemed to notice more than patients said aloud. She greeted Margaret with concern. "Margaret, it's good to see you. What brings you in today?" Margaret hesitated, then pulled the napkin from her pocket and unfolded it carefully, revealing the 2 small pills. "Evelyn, I need you to test these. They're supposed to be for my headaches, but something isn't right. I don't feel like myself anymore. I need to know if I'm imagining things." Dr. Turner's brows furrowed. She placed the pills into a small vial and promised, "I'll have the lab run a toxicology screen immediately. Give me a couple of days, Margaret, and in the meantime, be cautious. Only take medication you know is prescribed directly from me. Margaret left the clinic feeling both terrified and vindicated. For once, she was not alone in her suspicion. There would be science to confirm or deny her fears. Back home, the atmosphere felt colder. Daniel returned from work, his face tight with frustration. Daniel, 38, was tall like his father had been, with the broad shoulders and sandy brown hair now peppered with early gray. He had his father's gentle eyes, but lately they no longer softened when he looked at Margaret. Instead, they hardened with a mixture of doubt and irritation. "Mom," he said that evening, standing stiffly by the living room door, "Vanessa told me you've been forgetting things again, leaving the stove on, misplacing bills. She's worried, and honestly, I am too." Margaret's throat tightened. "Daniel, I'm fine. I don't have dementia. But he cut her off, his voice rising. "You're 63, Mom." "These things happen. Vanessa just wants to make sure you're safe. Maybe it's time we think about a place where you can get proper care. A nursing facility." The words struck like a blow. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Daniel, please. You know me. You know my mind. I'm not losing myself." Daniel sighed heavily, running a hand down his clean-shaven face. He looked weary, worn down by arguments he didn't want to have. "I love you, Mom. But you don't see what we see. You need help." Behind him, Vanessa appeared in the doorway, her expression painted with concern. She rested a delicate hand on Daniel's arm, her perfectly manicured nails catching the light. "Daniel's only thinking of what's best, Margaret. None of us want to see you struggle." Margaret's gaze locked onto her daughter-in-law's, searching for cracks in the mask. All she saw was triumph gleaming beneath false sympathy. She swallowed her protest, knowing that to argue further would only cement Vanessa's story. Instead, she forced a nod, retreating inward, her thoughts spiraling. 2 days later, Dr. Turner called. Margaret's hands trembled as she answered the phone in her bedroom, her voice hushed so Vanessa wouldn't hear. "Margaret," Dr. Turner said gently, "the lab results came back. Those pills contained lorazepam, a powerful sedative, and traces of scopolamine. In small doses over time, they can cause confusion, memory loss, dizziness, exactly what you described. These are not standard medications for headaches. Whoever gave these to you did so deliberately." The words settled like ice in Margaret's veins. The proof she needed was now real. Vanessa was poisoning her. "Thank you, Evelyn," she whispered. "Please, keep this between us for now." Margaret hung up, her heart both heavy and steeled. She now knew the truth, but proof alone was not enough to save her. Vanessa's grip on Daniel was growing stronger by the day, and with Daniel already convinced his mother needed professional care, the danger had never been closer. One wrong step, and Margaret could lose not only her freedom, but her very life. As she sat on the edge of her bed that night, listening to the sound of rain against the windows, Margaret resolved one thing. She would not let Vanessa succeed. Chapter 5. Dangerous Confrontation. The Collins house seemed quieter than usual, though the silence was not peaceful, but thick, suffocating. Margaret had not slept well since the call from Dr. Turner. Proof of Vanessa's cruelty sat heavy in her heart, but she knew words alone would never sway Daniel. She needed something undeniable, something even Vanessa could not twist into another story. That was where Chloe Ramirez became essential. Chloe, just 24, was a striking young woman with a mix of strength and fragility in her posture. She had dark hair cut into a blunt bob that framed her pale, angular face, and large brown eyes that seemed older than her years. The grief of losing her grandmother had left a permanent shadow in her gaze, but also a fierce determination. When Margaret met her in a quiet cafe downtown, Chloe's voice was steady, her hands firm on the table, though her knuckles whitened. "We have to do more than talk, Mrs. Collins. People never believe words. We need evidence, things no one can deny. Over the following weeks, Margaret and Chloe worked together in secret. Chloe had contacts in the tech world, old friends from college who dabbled in surveillance equipment. Through one of them, a wiry man named Luke Harris, they obtained a discreet camera hidden in the frame of a picture. Luke, barely 30, was slim with messy blonde hair and wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of man who lived behind screens more than among people. He handed Chloe the device with a crooked smile and muttered, "This thing has saved a lot of people who were ignored. Just be careful. If she's as dangerous as you say, don't let her catch you." Margaret's hands shook the first night she placed the camera in the kitchen, hidden where it could see the counter where Vanessa prepared everything. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish, a scent Vanessa insisted on, masking all other smells. Margaret pretended to busy herself in the garden while the camera silently recorded inside. That night, she and Chloe watched the footage on Chloe's laptop. There it was, Vanessa, elegant as always, in a silk blouse and dark slacks, stirring a powder into Margaret's tea before carrying it into the living room with her practiced smile. The sight sent a chill down Margaret's spine. "This is it," Chloe whispered, her eyes wide. "This is enough to take to the police." But Margaret hesitated. "If we go too soon, Daniel won't believe it. He'll think it's a trick, that we've staged it somehow. We need more. We need a pattern, so they collected more." Chloe searched through online records and, with Luke's help, found receipts tied to Vanessa's credit card purchases of scopolamine, lorazepam, and other substances hidden under generic supplier names. They compiled everything into a growing folder of evidence. Each document, each video clip, felt like another piece of armor for Margaret, something to shield her from the despair of being dismissed. But secrets are fragile things, and one evening Margaret's luck faltered. Vanessa walked into Margaret's room without knocking, carrying a folded pile of laundry. Her sharp blue eyes caught the edge of a paper sticking out from under a book on the nightstand. Before Margaret could stop her, Vanessa set the clothes down and picked up the paper. "What's this?" Vanessa asked, her voice sweet, but edged with suspicion. It was one of the receipts Chloe had printed for Margaret to keep. Margaret's heart hammered. She forced a smile. "Just bills. Old bills I was sorting." But Vanessa's smile was sharper than knives. She tucked the paper back under the book, stepped closer, and lowered her voice. "Margaret, I don't know what you think you're doing, but you should stop. Curiosity can be very dangerous at your age. Wouldn't you rather spend your days peacefully? You don't want to end them in chaos." Margaret froze as Vanessa's hand brushed her shoulder gently, almost lovingly, yet the touch made her skin crawl. The message was clear. Vanessa knew, and she was warning her. That night, Margaret called Chloe in a whisper, her voice breaking. "She suspects me. She threatened me without saying the words. Chloe, I'm afraid." Chloe, though shaken, remained firm. "Then we have to act faster. Bring everything together. If she realizes you know, she'll escalate." But Vanessa was already escalating. She began watching Margaret more closely, her presence a constant shadow. Daniel seemed oblivious, but Margaret noticed the way Vanessa lingered near her teacup, the way she hovered when Margaret took her medication, her gaze sharp as a hawk's. Margaret pretended to comply, swallowing pills she later spat into tissue, sipping tea while letting the liquid slip discreetly into a nearby plant. She felt like a prisoner in her own home, acting out the role Vanessa wanted to see while plotting survival behind the scenes. The breaking point came during a family dinner. Daniel had grilled steaks outside, eager to bring some normalcy back to their tense household. He was laughing too loudly, his attempts to smooth the edges of their fractured lives obvious in every forced smile. Vanessa set the table with her usual elegance, her golden bracelets jingling softly as she moved. Margaret sat with a knot in her stomach, aware of the steaming cup of tea Vanessa had placed in front of her. The scent was faintly bitter, wrong. Margaret's throat tightened. She glanced at Daniel, who was busy carving his steak, oblivious to the storm around him. Vanessa's eyes met hers across the table, full of quiet triumph. Margaret lifted the cup, trying to stall, but her hand trembled. A sudden wave of dizziness swept over her, so strong she nearly dropped the cup. Her vision blurred, her body swaying. "Mom?" Daniel's voice sounded far away. Margaret tried to speak, but the words slurred. Her chest felt tight, her arms weak. Panic clawed at her as she realized she had been poisoned again, more heavily this time. Her last sight before the darkness closed in was Vanessa's face, serene and beautiful, tilted in false concern as she reached across the table. The sterile brightness of the hospital room was the first thing Margaret saw when she opened her eyes. The faint hum of machines filled her ears, accompanied by the steady rhythm of a heart monitor. For a moment, she thought she had slipped into some kind of afterlife, but then the sharp ache in her chest reminded her she was still alive. Her throat felt parched, her limbs weak, but her mind was intact, sharp enough to recall the last moments before she collapsed at the dinner table. Vanessa's cold gaze, the bitterness in the tea, the darkness that swallowed her whole. Beside her bed, Chloe sat slouched in a plastic chair, her face pale with exhaustion, her dark bob framing her tired eyes. She startled awake when Margaret stirred, instantly leaning forward. "Mrs. Collins, thank God. You're awake?" They said it was close. Her voice cracked, and her usual composure slipped to reveal the fear she had been holding back. Margaret managed a whisper. "Vanessa?" "She doesn't know we're here," Chloe reassured, her voice steadying. "She thinks you're unconscious. But I've already called someone who can help us." That someone arrived later that morning. A man in his early 50s stepped into the room with a calm air of authority. His name was Detective Samuel Grant, a private investigator Chloe had reached out to after realizing the police might dismiss Margaret's accusations without proof. Grant was tall, broad-shouldered, with graying hair cropped short, and eyes that had seen more lies than most people could imagine. His suit was plain, dark gray, with a tie slightly loosened, and his voice was low, deliberate. "Mrs. Collins, Miss Ramirez filled me in. If half of what you've told me is true, we're looking at a dangerous predator. But I don't work on assumptions. I work on evidence." Chloe nodded, pulling a laptop from her bag. She showed Grant the footage of Vanessa mixing powder into Margaret's tea, along with the stack of receipts and documents tied to her purchases. Grant's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening as he watched. "This isn't just attempted poisoning. This looks like a pattern. Do you mind if I dig deeper?" Within days, Grant unearthed a trail of horror. He tracked Vanessa's employment history and found 3 elderly clients she had worked with over the last 5 years, all of whom had died under ambiguous circumstances. Their deaths had been attributed to heart failure or natural causes, but in each case, Vanessa had been listed as a caretaker or assistant. Insurance documents surfaced 2 policies taken out in their names with suspicious beneficiaries. One policy even listed a distant cousin of Vanessa's who, when interviewed, admitted he had no idea why he was named. Meanwhile, Margaret was recovering slowly in the hospital. Daniel visited, his face pale with worry, though still clinging to the belief that Vanessa was blameless. "Mom, Vanessa's been beside herself. She says you must have had a bad reaction to your medication. You scared her." His words stung, but Margaret held her tongue, knowing the truth would come soon enough. The confrontation came when Detective Grant invited Daniel to a quiet conference room in the hospital. Margaret was present, sitting upright though still weak, with Chloe by her side. On the table lay the evidence: printed receipts, insurance papers, and the damning video clips. Grant slid a file across the table. "Mr. Collins, I think you should see this. It concerns your wife." Daniel's hands trembled as he flipped through the documents. His eyes widened at the footage of Vanessa slipping powder into a drink. This can't be right. She would never." His voice faltered as he saw her name tied to 3 other suspicious deaths. His breath came shallow, denial cracking at the edges. That was when the door opened, and Vanessa herself stepped inside, elegant as ever in a cream-colored dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled. She froze at the sight of the evidence spread across the table. Her eyes flickered from Daniel to Margaret, then to the detective. For a moment, her mask held composed, gracious. But then Grant spoke firmly. "Mrs. Collins, you are under investigation for attempted murder, insurance fraud, and suspected involvement in multiple homicides. Anything you say—" "Stop!" Vanessa snapped, her composure finally breaking. She slammed her hand on the table, her blue eyes blazing. "You think you can destroy everything I've built? Do you know how hard it was to get here? To secure what I deserve?" Her voice rose, sharp and venomous. "Those old fools were going to die anyway. I just helped it along, and Margaret, she should be grateful I even tolerated her." Daniel stared at her, his face drained of all color. "Vanessa, what are you saying?" But Vanessa couldn't stop. Rage spilled from her in every word. "Don't look at me like that. You know your mother is weak, clinging to life she doesn't even deserve. I was doing us both a favor, Daniel. We could have had everything, her house, her money, her pathetic little legacy. All of it could have been ours if she'd just gone quietly." The room fell silent, Vanessa's confession echoing like a gunshot. Detective Grant's expression hardened. He signaled to 2 uniformed officers waiting outside, who stepped in and placed handcuffs on her wrists. Vanessa struggled, her voice shrill now, stripped of its carefully crafted elegance. "Daniel! Tell them I was doing it for us." But Daniel couldn't move. He stood frozen, watching as the woman he thought he loved was dragged out of the room, her words unraveling into incoherent screams. When the door finally shut, Daniel sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Margaret reached out, her fingers trembling as she touched his arm. "Now you know," she whispered softly. "Now you see." Tears slipped down Daniel's cheeks, his voice broken. "I was blind, Mom. I let her almost kill you." Margaret held him as best she could, her own tears spilling freely. Chloe stood silently at their side, her eyes fierce but glistening with relief. For the first time, the truth was undeniable, and justice had finally begun its work. The trial had been swift. With video recordings, toxicology reports, and Vanessa's own furious confession, the jury had little doubt. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom, once filled with her polished charm and carefully crafted image, had become the stage of her downfall. Margaret watched her daughter-in-law led away in handcuffs, not with triumph, but with a deep, weary sense of closure. The battle was over, but the wounds remained. Daniel, however, carried a heavier burden. Weeks after the verdict, he sat across from his mother in the hospital's quiet garden, his shoulders slumped forward, his once boyish face marked with new lines of guilt. His brown hair, usually neat, had grown unruly, and his eyes, once bright with ambition, seemed perpetually clouded. "I should have protected you, Mom," he murmured, his voice rough from sleepless nights. "I should have seen what she was doing. I let her turn me against you." Margaret, thinner now but regaining her strength, reached across the table, her hand resting on his. "You were deceived, Daniel. Don't let her poison haunt you longer than it already has. The best way to make amends is to live differently." She spoke firmly, but in her heart she knew Daniel would wrestle with this shadow for years. Several months later, Margaret made a bold decision. She sold the old family home, a place once filled with warmth, but now stained by betrayal. With the money, she purchased a modest cottage on the coast, a white shingled house overlooking the endless stretch of blue Atlantic waters. The salty breeze carried the scent of renewal, and for the first time in years, Margaret felt truly free. Her new neighbors welcomed her kindly. Among them was Helen Murray, a widow in her 70s with short silver curls and a lively laugh that contrasted with her frail frame. Helen had an easy warmth, the kind of woman who brought cookies on the first visit and insisted on sharing gossip about everyone on the street. She quickly became both confidant and companion. Margaret appreciated her candor. Helen spoke of loss, of surviving cancer, and of starting over with the kind of resilience only hardship could carve into a person. But Margaret's transformation wasn't limited to her surroundings. Chloe, with her youthful determination, proposed they create something lasting from their ordeal. Together, they founded the Silver Shield Initiative, a small organization aimed at raising awareness about elder abuse and financial exploitation. Chloe, at 28, poured her energy into building the outreach program. Her dark eyes shone with purpose, her voice steady as she spoke to volunteers about her grandmother's story and Margaret's survival. Margaret, though less tech-savvy, became the heart of the project. She shared her experiences at community meetings, her voice trembling at first but soon finding strength. At one gathering, she stood before a group of 20 people in the local community center. The room smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood. She looked at the audience, faces ranging from young social workers to retirees, and said, "I was once told that I was weak, that my time had passed, that my life no longer had value. But here I stand, not as a victim, but as a survivor. If my story can keep even one of you safe, then all that pain was not in vain." Applause filled the room, and Margaret felt tears prick her eyes, not of sadness, but of release. Daniel often visited her by the sea. Though still haunted, he worked tirelessly to rebuild their bond. Sometimes he arrived with flowers, sometimes with groceries, and sometimes simply with his presence, sitting quietly with his mother on the porch as waves crashed in the distance. He confessed he had started seeing a therapist, trying to forgive himself. Margaret encouraged it, knowing that healing was not linear, but necessary. Life began to weave itself into a new rhythm. Margaret joined a book club at Helen's suggestion, where she debated classics with retirees and middle-aged teachers alike. She learned to paint, her first canvas clumsy but vibrant, with colors of sunrise over the ocean. She even adopted a companion, a golden retriever puppy named Sunny, with oversized paws, floppy ears, and a boundless, clumsy energy that filled her home with laughter. In the quiet hours of evening, when the world outside her window glowed pink and orange, Margaret would sit with Sunny at her feet and reflect. She knew scars remained, the betrayal, the near loss of her life, but she also recognized the strength that had risen from them. Like the mythical phoenix, she had burned, suffered, and been reborn from the ashes, fiercer and more radiant than before. The closing chapter of her life was not one of tragedy, but of resilience. And as she watched Chloe's initiative grow, as she saw Daniel take tentative steps toward forgiveness, as she built new friendships and embraced new joys, Margaret realized she had rewritten her story. She was not defined by Vanessa's cruelty, nor by the years of silence. She was defined by survival, by renewal, and by the legacy she chose to build moving forward.